mentioned, today I'll be speaking about the common practice Plateau. I'm a senior growth consultant at Phiture, and yeah, I think you all heard the introduction, so we can get right to it. So I'll start off by asking all of you a question. How many of you have read an article about ASO best practices? Surprisingly, not that many. Okay. But I'm sure you'll be quite familiar with a few of the normal ideas or the practices to apply. Optimize your app's title and subtitle, write engaging app descriptions, add compelling visual elements, whatever that might mean, encourage reviews and ratings, and analyze the competition. Now, a second question for you. How many of you have actively applied best practices into your app strategy? Nice, quite a few. So it's very important. We don't want to sort of not give best practices the glory that they deserve, but there's so much information out there. Everybody has access to articles, blog posts, tools, that with everybody having the same information accessible to them, we're all doing the same thing. We're all applying best practices, which means they've now become common practice. And if you aren't able to actually incorporate some dynamic, sometimes complex, really out-of-the-box ideas into your strategy, you run the risk of seeing diminishing returns from here on out. I'm sure we've all come to terms with the fact that the app and the Play stores are extremely competitive places. There are millions of domestic, international, and indie app developers all fighting for a space in a mostly oversaturated market. So the question is, how can you actually really go above and beyond and apply more than just best practices to your strategy? Today, I aim to present 3 ideas to you that are still in the best practice phase and have not yet become common practice. I'll break them up into 3 different sections, namely the human, the machine, and the human and the machine. So let's start off with the human. As mobile growth practitioners, often we distance ourselves from the users. We put them into a faraway box, and we refer to them as a data point. I think it's very easy to forget that all of us are also users. We all use apps. We have the same sort of needs as every other user in the room. You need the app, you go to search for it, and you download it. We ran some Phiture research quite recently, where we sent 16,000 users from a meta campaign to a landing page to basically quantify what we already know about the user's searching and scrolling behavior, and to understand how they actually interact with the App Store listing. We found that it took 11 seconds on average to go from your search to your download. Almost 90% of the users only spend up to 2 seconds on your page, so it really means that you have one shot to actually win their attention and convince them to download. When looking at the screenshots and how much users actually spend time looking at them, between screenshots 1 to 3, we saw around 84 to 87% of the users actually give you their time of day to look at them. But from the 4th screenshot onwards, 5% or fewer actually continue to scroll through them and look at what you're showing them. We also found that, I think all of us are aware of this, basically nobody will read your long description. So particularly on iOS, when the keywords are not indexed, there really isn't much use in actually spending too much time and effort on it. The image on the right over here is also sort of a finding from research that we did at Phiture last year. We're speaking to the users through running both interviews and surveys. We found that most of them also sort of look at reviews and ratings as the first and foremost elements before downloading the app. So on Google Play specifically, you can filter out any apps ranked below 4.5 or 4.0 ratings or stars. So again, as all of us are also users in the room, nobody really wants to download a 2-star rated app. Then working with another client this year, they've also run some user research where they ran interviews and spoke to users about the actual creative assets and the imagery used in the screenshots. And this test over here is a sort of result that we saw time and time again. So before we ran the research, we would see flat results. We weren't even able to see a loss, which would at least teach us something about the way the users ticked and understood the assets. But after speaking to the users, they gave us a lot of insights into their cultural findings, and told us which sort of subcultures or professional people who they really would actually associate themselves with should be in the screenshots. And after that, we started to see much, much more impressive results, where the users actually had some kind of personal affinity with the assets that they were seeing. And through this test, we got 17.2% uplift, which, as mentioned, we hadn't got for a very long time, so we were very happy with it. And in a different market, also from just switching out one image, we managed to achieve 10.1% uplift, and it was a completely static result. So once you have spoken to your users, you found a way to actually understand exactly what makes them tick. The trick is to also not stop here. You need to really build on your learnings, continue to make small tweaks and iterations, and see how much juice can be squeezed before you move on to the next creative tactic. So at some point, you will probably hit creative fatigue when you stop seeing a significant win, and that's when the machine comes into play. So this is a framework which I assume at least some people in the room have seen, because Phiture has been using this for many years. It's our CRO, or conversion rate optimization loop, where we do our research, we hypothesize, prioritize, create the assets, test them, measure and report, and then start again. We very much do so follow this framework because it really works very well for us. But at this point, we don't want to do everything by ourselves, which is where the machine comes into play. So ChatGPT is a really great way to get some more ideas for some creative inspiration and to add some data and proper research into our hypotheses. So often we have this sort of personal feeling that if we were to add this creative element or we were to change the screenshot order around, we would expect to see a win. But this isn't always a founded statement, and we actually want to feed ChatGPT with some research and with some data to make sure that we can come up with a backlog of ideas which have a much more likely or much better chance of winning. But of course, with AI or ChatGPT, we can't just leave it to its own devices. We still need a human to actually fact-check everything and make sure that everything is as sort of sound and realistic as possible. So I've personally had some very strange suggestions from ChatGPT. We work with the sporting app, who's huge in the US, and they have a very specific cultural following who uses like a really low-key jargon which fits the following like really to the T. So I tried out many different ChatGPT prompts to try to get something as compelling and captivating to those users as possible. But some of them were just a bit strange. So I don't know if anybody here is from the US or from Australia, but something like fair dinkum, I think is probably used on the streets. Maybe it's a bit of slang, but when you're actually in the app in the Play Store, it's not really the terminology that you expect to see. And similarly for the testing hypotheses, also apologies, I'm not sure why the flags aren't loading, but there should be a German and a Spanish flag. ChatGPT got very stereotypical, and for Germany, they said, okay, let's show the sporting game happening in front of the most iconic building. Fans can hold German flags, which of course could work for a sporting match. But eating pretzels, I mean, I don't think that really goes hand in hand with watching a match. And similarly in Spain, if anybody here is from there, I don't think it's that realistic to see flamenco dancers watching a game in front of La Sagrada Familia. So it's very important that we do still have humans sort of fact-checking this, doing the sense checking, and making sure that ChatGPT is actually sort of sticking to the straight and narrow. But for A/B testing specifically, we now have an AI-only or machine-only tool, which has really accelerated our assessing abilities and taken out the human sort of waiting around and indecisiveness when it comes to actually applying or not applying tests. So before telling you about the actual tool, I'll go through some of the main benefits of AI, which is that AI doesn't forget, AI doesn't ignore, AI is very good at identifying patterns, it builds on its own learnings, and AI doesn't dilly-daddle. So this might be specific to me, the way I work with my team. I'm not sure if anybody here can relate to it, but I do like to think that in a room here of mobile growth practitioners, it can be very easy to sort of nerd out when it comes to A/B tests, because you spend a lot of time talking to designers, coming up with hypotheses, creating the perfect set of assets, and you have some kind of emotional investment in the actual results of the test. So you wake up in the morning, you check the bars, depending on how far into the green or the red it's going, you feel some kind of emotional shift. And it can happen that we leave tests running for too long because we sort of say, okay, well, maybe one more Tuesday will give us that daily, weekly spike, or let's try for 3 more days and see if we start to see a difference. But that means that we often lose time where we could actually have just killed the test, iterated, and moved on. So that's where Press Play, as an AI tool, is really coming to great use for us, and we're seeing some very exciting results. So it's a tool which actually uses generative AI to create A/B test assets, to launch them, to kill or apply the variance depending on how it's performing. It stores the data and it captures it to then build it into future tests to run based on its learnings. And we did a case study with a company called Wildlife Studios, which is a huge gaming company. They have sort of in the low number of billions of users, where we used Press Play to see how we could actually optimize their icon. So this was the first one that they had before there was any AI integration. We let Press Play do its thing. We press play, it changed the assets, launched the test, monitored the results. And as you can see, at first they were very negative. Like, I personally don't think I've ever seen such negative results. But based on these learnings, the AI tool was able to capture the information and the insights and build it into the next round, where we then saw much better results. So the first one, as we can see, is still trending negative. The second one is trending positive, but it's not stat sig. But AI was able to capture these elements that were making it perform better, integrate that into the next round of testing, where we were able to see a really, really impressive, amazing win. So because Press Play has quite a ruthless early kill rule, there's no time wasted in sort of saying, okay, let's wait for 1 more day, give it a few more sort of opportunities to pick up and see an improvement in your results. And it just captures your information immediately and then decides to kill the experiment. So one caveat is that because it can kill experiments so early, they may have had the option of actually picking up and seeing an improvement in the future. But because the patterns are identified so strongly, these insights are still incorporated into the learning, which they then built on and then incorporated into the upcoming tests. So also when it comes to gaming versus apps or app publishers, it is very different. And I know that most apps can't do icon testing very easily because we have strict legal, marketing, branding guidelines, which we do have to stick to. So if you aren't able to test app icons or feature graphics that easily because of your brand and marketing regulations, we have screenshot order tests and short description tests, which are much easier to actually get through the approval stage. You can then press play, and it runs the tests for you. So for screenshots order tests, for example, once you have your 8 screenshots, or 8 to 10, however many you have live in the store at the time, if you were to test every single combination possible, it would be almost 1 million permutations, 773 years of testing, which I assume most of us here don't have the time for. So thanks to the really ruthless early kill or kill early rule and a mathematical calculation to make sure that we can find the optimal combination possible, we can speed up this process much faster and cycle through the tests at a much quicker rate to secure that win. Similarly, for the short description tests, we can use ChatGPT again to feed it with some ideas for how to actually create the short descriptions. We do need to tell it to go easy on the emoticons because ChatGPT loves putting in like 10 emojis. But once you've got this backlog to get sent through to your legal team to get them all approved, you can press play, use your custom store listings on Google Play, and simply cycle through lines and lines of tests to ensure that we hit a stat-sig win. So I guess the future of ASO is very interesting. It's a really dynamic, constantly changing landscape, which has changed significantly since its birth or the beginning of best practices. And ASO as itself is not a once-off activity. It's an ongoing process where you constantly need to understand your audience, work out how they tick, and incorporate that human psychology into it. So ASO, or apps optimization, is just at the tip of the iceberg, and there's a lot going on below the surface, which personally I'm very excited about. Thank you.